The iMore Show is brought to you today by MailRoute. MailRoute is handling the email filtering for ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery. That's a big deal. They are the largest organization dedicated to computer science. Why would the ACM do this? Why should you do this? Well, it's because MailRoute makes sure that your mail is spam-free, virus-free, bounced email messages free. It's a service. There's no software to buy, no hardware to install. All you do is sign up, and they make sure that your email box is spam-free. It's just that simple. There's an interface. There's notifications. If you are a developer, if you're a nerd, you can get in there and administer it. There's APIs for easy management. There's LDAP. There's Active Directory. There's TLS. There's everything you could possibly want in an email service. And you can try it all right now. Just go to mailroute.net/iMore for a free trial and 10% off for the lifetime of your account. Thank you, MailRoute. It is June 26, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to talk about price drops on the iMac, price drops on the iPod Touch, iOS 8, Yosemite, a little bit of Google I/O, and all the news in Apple. This is the iMore Show. Joining me once again back from his Kaiju conference is Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
I'm doing well, Rene. Thank you. How are you today?
Good. So how was your show?
I come back bearing the cup of shame.
That's not a cup of shame. That's a Steve Strezza mug.
This is a Steve Strezza mug. Steve, this one's for you. So it was fun. It was fun. We had a great time. One of my kids cosplayed for 4 days. I did the Kaiju panel, and I won this in a contest called Extreme Geek.
Nice. I saw both you and your lovely wife, Bonnie, tweeting the heck out of that show. It looked like you had a great time.
Yeah, we always have a good time at PortCon, Maine. That's how you can find it on the Twitters, at PortCon, Maine.
Very nice. Well, I celebrated Quebec Day, which actually is technically St. John the Baptist Day because he's the patron saint of Quebec, but now it's called National Day, I think, or Fête Nationale, which is national holiday whatever, and it was going to be nice. We were going to have a wonderful barbecue. Everyone in Quebec was, throwing off our winter gear, getting south of the wall, and actually trying to enjoy summer. And then it rained all day.
Were giants riding woolly mammoths among the celebrants?
No, there were no Americans. It was just a Canadian.
Oh, nice. Okay, that's the way it's going to be, huh?
No,
okay,
so this is absolutely. I don't mean that. This is absolutely true. Like, I used to compete in a lot of grappling tournaments, and friends of mine and I would go to America for tournaments, and we were always tiny. Americans, I don't know if it's the better weather, if you have better food, but like a foot taller than Canadians. It's amazing.
It's freedom. That's what freedom does for you, baby. It's freedom.
You have grown tall on the virtue of freedom. All right, so we had an interesting week. So while you were gone, Peter, Apple introduced a quote-unquote new, basically an updated iMac that was cheaper. It's $10.99, which is a bit of a price drop, but it's not all roses because it's lower spec. Some people said it's equivalent to MacBook Air specs, and the RAM is soldered in there, so you can't upgrade it. It's what you see is what you get machine.
Yeah, as Mark Gurman from 9 to 5 Mac put it, it's basically the 21-inch MacBook Air.
The man's a poet.
Indeed, because it's got a lower power processor than the one that's a few $100s more, and it is in many respects a very basic machine. But people who own iMacs and people who keep their eye on the spec of Mac computers need to remember that a lot of people might be interested in the iMac but don't particularly care about specs. They're much more driven by the lowest price that they can get. And at $10.99, that's a really good deal for a really nice, high-quality 21.5-inch machine, I have to say. You're right about the 8 gigs of RAM being soldered on, so you can't upgrade. Upgrading the 21.5-inch in its other forms with the faster processor, not an easy job either. That 21.5-inch is, by design, by Apple's design, unfortunately, just not really that upgradable. Still, you can order it with a Fusion drive, or you can get it with an SSD, which would make it an extremely fast machine despite the more limited processor speed.
Oh, that's an additional cost, right?
But that would be an additional cost, and that would raise it up to the cost of the more expensive machine. So I think what's going to happen is that this is a machine, as far as consumers are concerned, where Apple has an opportunity to upsell them to the other machines, but also give them a budget-priced Macintosh with a built-in display if that's what they want. And it gets the Mac down to a lower price than we've seen it. So that's good.
Mutual friend Jason Snell was on Mac Break Weekly with us this week, and he said that he would encourage people to check out the refurb Macs because you could maybe get a better machine for the same price. Do you concur with that?
I concur with it 100%. When I bought my, speaking of MacBook Airs, when I bought my 11-inch MacBook Air in 2010, I got it refurbed from Apple. They come with a full warranty. They're Apple Care eligible. There is literally no downside. And buying refurb from Apple, you're getting a product that is absolutely in sellable quality. You won't find many blemishes or you won't find any problems with the screen. It is, for all intents and purposes, a perfect condition machine. So yeah, it's definitely worth doing. I strongly encourage people to always check the refurb section of the Apple online store before they make a purchase.
Yeah, I do too. We've gotten several computers in my family that way, and they've always been. I mean, one of them is still going. It's been, I don't know, 4 years. It was one of the first. Yeah. That
MacBook Air is still going strong.
Yeah, they're great machines. One of the other things is that I don't know about you. I was kind of wondering if Apple would really push it for the $9.99 price tag, especially to target education, because conceivably schools might want to buy 20 of these for a computer lab or a classroom or something. But schools do get a $50 discount, so it's $10.49, not quite $9.99, not psychologically, but it's close.
Wait, let's distinguish that, Rene. The academic discount for teachers and for students is $50 off. It's $10.49. I imagine if you're buying in bulk and you are doing a large order with Apple, Apple has a different price for you than what teachers and students are getting individually. So I would imagine the 21.5-inch iMac is now below $1,000 if you're buying in bulk.
No, that's a good point.
Very, very close to it.
And that I would imagine is a good machine for education. It might not have the lifespan, like it might not run OS 10.14 Compton or whatever the heck is going to be, but they'll get several good years of use out of that.
Well, you have to look at it from I think from the 1,000-yard perspective on this. The Mac that you're buying, the 21.5-inch Mac that you're buying, is basically just like a MacBook Air that you would be buying today. And what is the reasonable life expectancy of a MacBook Air? Well, in the shop that I work in, I see MacBook Airs come in that are 5 or 6 years old that are still operational. Apple is supporting, operating system software today on machines that were built in 2007. So if you buy a machine, today, in 2014, you should reasonably expect that it's going to work into the new decade if you take care of it and if you understand what its limitations are over the lifetime of the device. But you're also getting an iMac that comes with twice the standard RAM of the MacBook Air. So you're getting a much better machine RAM-wise than you would be getting with a MacBook Air, and you're also getting something that uses a conventional hard drive, unless you update it with a Fusion drive or an SSD. So you've got a lot of storage capacity, is my point.
Webmaster, I want to get the number right, Webmaster 305 in the chat room is saying that the only difference with the refurb is you don't get the fancy Apple box. But with the money you save, you can get a fancy Apple box off eBay for about $10.
I know some people who keep their fancy Apple boxes and their boxes for everything that they buy. Personally, I don't have the space for it. I share a house with a wife and 3 children, so we're limited on space. That stuff, quite frankly,
you keep their boxes. You can't keep yours.
It goes in the recycling pile within 30 days of receipt, just like every other box that comes in my house. So if it's important to you, okay, whatever, but otherwise, don't waste your time.
And you have updated all of the Mac buyer's guides and the iMac buyer guides to reflect it. So if people are looking for additional advice, they can go to imore.com/Mac-buyers-guide, and I'll put a link in the show notes. And all of Peter's wisdom is there for your visual and textual perusement.
Thank you.
But it is interesting in general, and we're going to transition to the iPod, that Apple reduced the MacBook Air price earlier this year. They didn't update to a new MacBook Air. There wasn't a Retina MacBook Air. They upgraded to the latest version of Haswell processors, but they also made it $899 instead of $999, and now they've done the same thing with the iMac. You think this is just them recognizing savings in the economies of scale and passing them down, or do you think this is them exploring new opportunities, or where do you get this? What sense do you get from these Mac price changes, Peter?
Well, there's a continuity that we're seeing here that we'll talk about in a little while when it comes to iOS too. So it's a very interesting change across the board for Apple. I think Apple sees the writing on the wall. They understand that they have to increase value for people and that they have to hit better price points than they've been hitting. And they can do that because of the skill that they're operating in without killing their business. We don't want to see Apple turn into the next Dell, for example, and start producing stuff that just is wildly unprofitable for them. But people's tastes change, product lines mature, and Apple's got to recognize that there are new opportunities. So I'm happy to see it on the Mac end of things, and I hope that it's a trend that we'll see continue.
And I don't know some people are wondering what this port change. Like some people were hoping for a 4K iMac this year. Some people were hoping for a Retina MacBook Air this year. Apple doing this now, I don't think we can read any tea leaves into what their plans might be later in the year. I think those are still bound to things like Intel's Broadwell roadmap and things like display yield and pricing and structures.
That's exactly right.
All right, so the other price drop, the other new low-end model, Peter and I woke up this morning to find a press release from Apple saying that they had an updated iPod Touch. So previously, the low-end iPod Touch had no camera and only came in space gray. As of this morning, the 16-gigabyte iPod Touch comes in every nanochromatic color of the rainbow and has an iSight camera, the same 5-megapixel iSight camera found on the other iPod Touches, found on the iPad lineup. It's 16 gigabytes, which is a lower storage capacity. It still does have an Apple A5 processor. It's still a 2012 era class device. It was released at roughly the same time as the iPhone 5, 2012. I think that's right. iPhone 4S maybe. iPhone 5 because it's got the 4-inch screen. It does have the 4-inch Retina display. This again, Peter, is at least in my mind, Apple bringing greater value to people at the low end or the entry level of their devices.
Yeah, it's $30 off. It gets the iPod Touch to under $200, which is a psychological hurdle for some people. $199 is a nicer price than what they were getting before, and the colors are always nice as well. I also think that Apple's marketing department is trying very hard to produce copy that makes editors' eyes bleed, because they refer to the iPod Touch Loop, which is the device that connects to the bottom of the iPod Touch and lets you hold it or keep it lassoed to your wrist so it can flop around without falling down, as Unputdownable. That's like funner. They hate me.
Is our mutual friend Jim Dalrymple's The Loop going to be Unputdownable? Is it going to be a Heineken crossover with that?
Well, Heineken is Unputdownable for Jim Dalrymple, so yeah, I guess.
All the Loop things. That is absolutely interesting, and we're still suffering from funner. People still complain about Think Different years and years and years after Apple used that term. I mean,
whatever you have to say about it, though, you've got to admit that it sticks in your head.
It does. It's a splinter in my mind. But I think there's a lot of interesting use cases. Now, some people will dismiss it out of hand, not out of hand, but some people will dismiss it immediately because 16 gigabytes, she ain't what she used to be. Especially now that operating systems are bigger, that apps are bigger, that we're 64-bit, that we can do OpenGL ES 3.0 style games. I mean, these things are just getting bigger and more memory intensive. 1080p video, 5-megapixel pictures, all of that eats up storage space. But for people who want basically a music player, plus people who just want easy access to the App Store, people who want something pocketable, so an iPad is out for them, developers who want a device to test new versions of iOS on because they don't want to put it on their carry device. There's a wide range of people, and given Apple's announcements at WWDC, things like the new iCloud Drive and things like the new iCloud photo system, I think for entry-level people who only have $200 in their pocket, it's not a bad deal.
No, it's a very good deal. I mean, the processor that's used inside there and the capabilities of the iPod Touch really make it a wonderful device for anybody who wants to be able to experience the iOS ecosystem without the additional hassles of actually having to maintain a phone with it. The additional expense, the carrier fees and everything. So it's a nice machine and it fits a great niche. I see iPod touches everywhere. I especially see them with families. Families who have kids that maybe aren't ready for a cell phone, or parents who just don't want to get their kids cell phones, but they want to give them something that will let them message with their friends and do all the other things that kids want to do. It's a great device. It's an awesome device, and a lot of it's funny the use cases that I see for it, because iPod touches are ubiquitous at events like WWDC. Everybody's got one in their pocket to demo something on. I think it's really interesting who uses iPod touches. I see a lot of athletes use iPod touch because even though it's not as small as like an iPod Shuffle or even an iPod Nano, it's still a complete iOS device. So it gives them the additional functionality that they need to run the specific health and wellness apps that they want to use, or so on, and don't want their phone to get damaged by it potentially. So there are a lot of people who still want iPod touches, and now iPod touches are better value than before. The thing that I'm really wondering about, though, is what the long-term plan here is. I would like to see an iPod touch with an A7 processor, and I think that Apple would be crazy not to build one as soon as it can, because
4.7-inch and 5.5-inch iPod touches, maybe?
Yeah, it would be nice to have a larger format iPod Touch. It would also be nice to have an iPod Touch with some of the promising technology that iOS 8 is bringing us, like Metal, which is really important for performance gamers. If you're playing hardcore games on your iPod Touch, and don't laugh, a lot of people play hardcore effing games on their iPod Touch or their iPhone. That's going to be a killer console, or a killer handheld gaming rig. Something that will give consoles a run for their money.
Yeah, I think that's true. Just going back to something you said before, I got my little godchildren, they're 5 years old and 8 years old, iPod touches for Christmas, and I went with a 32 gigabyte model because they really wanted a camera. They love taking pictures, they love taking videos, they make their own iMovies, they make wonderful little iMovies for their entire family, and being able to do that, they don't really need 32 gigabytes. I mean, it's nice because they can keep all those movies there, but they don't have to with the cloud stuff and with their father pulling stuff off. If people can get in at a lower price point, it's easier to get it for families. And to your point about families, you can iMessage. The 5-year-old uses Siri to read and reply to iMessages. He's getting to the point where he could probably type it out, especially with the new predictive typing. But things like Siri make it so much easier. Airdropping between families, you can airdrop passes, you can airdrop photos, you can airdrop a lot of things just on a little virtual private network. And I don't mean a classic VPN, but I mean the way it uses Bluetooth LE and Wi-Fi Direct for a direct connection. There's a lot of things that you can do, especially when traveling, especially when kids, putting it in classrooms the same way we talked about the iMac. Lots of kids can have iPod touches to make photo books and photo projects and things like that. There's this huge area, and the gaming thing, Peter, and I'd love you to do an editorial about this at some point, I think especially when you get to what people could do this fall with an updated iPhone 6 style iPod touch is hugely exciting.
It really is. I look forward to this day, and I hope that it will come faster than it will for our lizard overlords to start feeding us pellet food before they grind us into Soylent Green.
Graham Stevens, the chat room, is saying it's also a great gateway drug to the iPhone, and that's absolutely true, because people who have a different phone or just don't want a smartphone can get it on an iPod Touch. For people for whom an iPad is just too big or isn't as portable as they want it to be, or for whatever reason, and especially starting at $200, it's not a bad deal. iPad Mini. The original iPad Mini is the same thing. It's also 16 gigabytes, bigger screen, so you can basically choose whether portability or screen size is more important to you.
Yeah, no, let's not deceive ourselves. iPod Touches are not as popular as iPhones and are never going to be as popular as iPhones. But Apple continues to sell them, and sells quite a number of them. So, Apple's going to continue development of the iPod regardless, or the iPod Touch regardless. But this is a nice little bump to get people interested in the same technology. And the camera, as you mentioned, is a very important feature. Everybody is used to taking pictures on their phones these days, or on other devices that are in their pocket. This not only has the benefit of giving people gigabytes to take pictures with a really nice camera, nice editing software as well, but it also plugs people into the iCloud ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that's going to be interesting too is, for example, I have an iPod Touch. I keep it on iOS 6 for now, just because I always want to compare what's changing with what used to be. So I have an iOS 6 device, an iOS 7 device, an iOS 8 device, and iOS 6 right now is on the iPod Touch. But I'm probably going to update it to iOS 8 just for the HomeKit stuff, because I have Sonos, I have Hue lights. It's not always convenient. I mean, I do have iPads around, I do have iPhones around, but just to have a dedicated device at the sofa that's my virtual remote control for my entire house is hugely appealing when that stuff gets, kind of cemented and organized.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned something before we started the show, Peter, that I also found interesting, and that is the iPod Touch pricing structure now is $200 for 16 gigabytes, $250 for 32 gigabytes, and $300 for 64 gigabytes. It's no longer 100 gigabytes between devices. It's only $50 between devices.
Right. It's no longer $100 between devices. It's $50. I wonder, looking at this, if this is a precursor for what we should expect from the iPhone this fall, whether Apple is going to lower the price differences between iPhones that are identical except for storage capacity to $50 as well, because that would certainly be a welcome change.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, everything is up in air this year. Every 2 years, Apple does something different. Like, they had the iPhone 5C. I actually prefer the iPad metallic colors to the iPhone 5C colors, just FYI. I know that's not everyone feels that way, but I do like them quite a lot. But the iPhone 5C was a new thing. Apple selling 2 new phones, quote-unquote new phones, in the same year. If Apple goes to 4.7 inches and 5.5 inches, and it sure seems like that's what they're going to do they keep around 4 inches as well? And then you have 4 inches, 4 inches, 4.7 inches, 5.5 inches. Are all iPads, do iPods sort of blend into iPads at that point? So you have a bunch of devices that are just Wi-Fi only from 4 inches all the way up to 10 inches. Is the iPhone the only one that keeps Phone.app, or does Phone.app leap over to the otherwise network-enabled, cellular-enabled devices? But also, how are these products differentiated? Is the 4-inch iPhone priced differently than the 4.7? Differently than the 5.5? Are they based on storage or only screen sizes? Is there going to be the world's most complicated product matrix imaginable come this September?
Yeah, I think that our imaginations are running amok, and that's always a dangerous thing. Apple will keep it as simple as they can. So, I don't think that all this stuff will ultimately yield an answer. I think Apple's going to simplify.
Yeah, it's just interesting because some people feel that the $100 price points based on storage are a money grab, that it doesn't cost that much to double SSD NAND flash storage, and Apple's just basically taking your money. But there's very few things that make sense to an average customer that you could charge for. Different ways to differentiate a product. And almost all product has to have a low-end version, has to have a mid-end version, has to have a high-end version, because that's how we have been enculturated to buy products. That's why there's 3 different kinds of microwaves from every manufacturer, 3 different kinds of refrigerators, 3 different packages on cars. It's the way products are broken down. And with the iPads now, we have the iPad mini screen size and the iPad Air screen size. A couple technical differences, very few. So you buy the screen size and the storage capacity, which is a little more complicated. I just don't know how far you can push that.
Yeah, you can't push it much further than that and still get people to stay, not to get overwhelmed very quickly. The average consumer, I think, is, as you say, looking for a way to clearly differentiate one product from another. When they, compare cars, they break them up by category, by what kind of car it is. Is it a sedan? Is it a subcompact? Is it a sports car? Whatever. And then how do you differentiate, between engines and trim packages and so on? It's a little bit different for each consumer. I think with electronics, it's a lot more simple than that. And I think that the right now, anyway, people are trained to look at memory. They're trained to look at memory with current mobile products the same way that they were taught to look at CPU speed in PCs 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, if someone comes to you now, because for those of you who don't know, Peter works in an Apple authorized reseller on the weekends, and he is man on the line when it comes to explaining this to customers. Is the Mac line still clear? Like, is 11-inch MacBook Air versus 13-inch MacBook Air versus 13-inch MacBook Pro versus 15-inch? The different CPU speeds, the different memory options. It seems to me like just the brand itself is still clean enough, and the details don't matter until you settle down on the brand.
The 13-inch portion of Apple's product line, the 13-inch laptop portion of Apple's product line is the most confusing, because you've got the 13-inch MacBook Air, and then you've got the 13-inch standard MacBook Pro, and then the 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display. So that can be kind of a slogging point for people who are just trying to get a feel for what one is over another. A lot of people look at the 15-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display and get freaked out by the price tag right away, because they're used to seeing 17-inch laptops for less than $1,000. Mm-hmm. So for you to throw a 15-inch laptop at them for $2,000, they're immediately like, "What the hell are you charging me for?" If they're not already qualified Mac users, people who are just browsing Macs for the first time usually get scared away by the higher-end equipment. But I think that Apple has it broken up well enough on the Mac line to make it a pretty easy sell. You've got the Mac Mini for somebody looking to just dip their toe in the water for the first time. You've got the iMac, which is the all-in-one. It's a name that people have known for, 15 years now. So it's something that they understand. Is that right? 15 years? 15 years for the iMac, right?
I think so, yeah.
No, actually longer.
97?
16. 98, right?
98, yeah.
98, right? So 16 years. Yeah, somebody in the chat room needs to memory check me. I think it was 98. God, I'm sorry.
It was one of those in the late 90s.
It was one of those in the late 90s. That's right. Back before parenthood and drug abuse took over my ability to measure periods of time. So yeah, you've got a lot of things and people figure it out. Bottom line. But you put too many things in the same bucket and people get confused, and you don't want to do that.
All right, I'm going to take a quick break and just thank our sponsor for today, Trunk Club. Now, Trunk Club is really interesting, Peter. Trunk Club, you go to www.trunkclub.com/iMore, and what it is a personal shopping service for men, maybe like us, who just don't know what to wear. Like, I've gone to the mall, I've walked into all the stores, and I've walked out again because nothing suited my taste, and I just didn't know how to put it together. So the crux of this is you go online, like I said, you can go to trunkclub.com/iMore. You can download their iPhone app, which is really easy to use. You pick stores that you like to shop at, styles of clothing that you like to wear, and then you get assigned a specialist, almost like a personal shopper who will talk to you and suggest wardrobe that will make you look good.
That sounds very interesting. So basically, it's a virtual personal shopper.
It is a real person. I mean, it's not a real 3D rendered person, but it's a real person with experience, I understand.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm not looking for Cortana here to offer me fashion advice, but cool. That's neat.
Yeah, and it's quality clothing. There's dedicated stylists. They take the guesswork out of shopping. They really want to get you stuff that you like. And they put together a trunk for you. You select items. They put together a trunk for you. They ship it to you. You take your time. You look at it, and you can send back anything you don't want. Now, I do have to point out this is U.S. only right now. They only do this in the United States, but that's still predominance of our audience. But you have 10 days to try on everything, and you send back whatever you don't like at no cost to you. If this sounds appealing, and it really should, because I've seen a lot of you out and about, and you could use, like me, a little bit of styling help, just go to trunkclub.com. No, I mean, Peter, you've been to the same trade shows I have. Everyone's wearing the WWDC jackets.
Look at me. Does it look like I could use help? Yes.
I'm assuming that's cosplay today.
There we go, yes.
Yeah, just go to trunkclub.com/iMore so they know that we sent you, and you will be starting to look good almost immediately. Better. You already look good. You're already a beautiful audience, but you'll look even better. Thank you, Trunk Club. All right, so Peter, now that we're on the subject of iPhone 6, actually there's one question from Ryan that I want to answer. He's wanted to know if there's any changes in the processor, the A5 processor, in the new iPod Touch. We'll have to wait for a teardown to know for sure, but I don't believe so. I believe that chip has been produced for a long time now, and they're just keeping on producing it.
Yeah, exactly. It is the same that we're accustomed to.
The Apple A5, which has been a workhorse processor for Apple.
Yes.
Nilesh wants to know, will the iPhone 6 be a world phone similar to the iPhone 4S? It's impossible to know anything until Apple actually announces and details it, but given how good a world phone the iPhone 5S especially, I mean, everyone has been getting better. 4S was okay, 5S was good, 5 was good, 5S was spectacular. It supports massive amounts of LTE bands and segments across the world. I can't imagine Apple giving up on that, Peter.
I can't imagine it either.
I mean, even the Verizon phone is an unlocked world phone. You stick a SIM in there, you can go to countries that only exist in DC comic books and still get reception.
Pretty much.
So here's another interesting topic, and I spoke about this a bit with Ben Beharin on Vector this week, and that is the big phone. So the rumor is 4.3 inches and 5.5 inches, and 5.5 inches is big. I mean, it's Galaxy Note big. Now, traditionally, those phones have not sold well in North America. Where they have sold well is in Asian countries, but they've sold well there primarily not the Galaxy Note, but the Galaxy Mega and other phones that are lower end, more entry level big phones, because people there sometimes are revenue constrained and they can only afford a phone. They can't have a phone or a tablet, and they need their primary computing device to be a phone, but to be as big as possible so they can do as many things as possible on it. And there's been rumors that a bigger iPhone 6 could be $100 more expensive, or could be, we've talked about it being exactly the same, like the iPad Air versus iPad Mini, only bigger. And the question here is, do Samsung Galaxy Notes not sell well in North America because they're Samsung Galaxy Notes, or because North Americans don't want phones that big? And there's never been any other data point. So I don't know about you, Peter, but I'm curious to see that if Apple does go 5.5 inches and does make it full-on flagship, every bit an iPhone 6, how that'll do in North America.
We will see, and that's a very good question, because I've certainly, just as a consumer, just as somebody who's owned iPhones, I've convinced myself that I would get a bigger phone. But performance is very important to me, so I would hope that the bigger phone would be a flagship phone, but, if it weren't, that would certainly affect my purchasing decision. How about you?
Yeah, so for me it's so counterintuitive, because I've been trained by a lot of technology to equate bigger size with being more expensive. Like the 13-inch MacBook Air is more expensive than the 11-inch. The 15-inch MacBook Pro is more expensive than the 13-inch. The MacBook Air is more expensive than the iPad Air is more expensive than the iPad Mini. So my general assumption was what I think your assumption was, that it's perfectly reasonable for a 5.5-inch iPhone to be the same price, if not more expensive. And it's hard to say, because the carrier subsidies do alter pricing. They could be subsidized more to cancel that out. But it is for it to be bigger. I would have a hard time seeing like, for example, if the 5C device, whatever that replacement is, like a 6C or something, if that was bigger, 5.5 inches, and the flagship was a 4.7, I could understand that for Asian markets, but it would seem odd to me.
Yeah, it would seem odd to me too. I don't know that really makes a lot of sense, but the bottom line is, my next iPhone is going to be the one that performs the fastest. If I can get that in the bigger size, great. If I can't, I'll stick with a smaller one.
And we haven't seen Apple create regional devices specifically. They've kept around things like the iPhone 4 is still available in the risk countries, in like India and China and places like that, because they wanted a really super cheap entry-level phone, but they didn't make a low-end iPhone 5C to fill that gap. They didn't make an iPhone 5C at the price of an iPhone 4. Instead, they made an iPhone 5C. That's pretty much what their previous pattern was. The older generation phone just kept around for a year longer. That would be a substantial change in Apple's direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the debate we've been having internally, I know Georgia says that she is getting the biggest iPhone she can. If it's 5.5 inches, that's fine. If she doesn't care because it's going in her purse, and if it's not in her purse, it's because she's playing Candy Crush on it, and she wants the biggest Candy Crush she can play without going to an iPad. Because she just doesn't want to carry one with her. She wants to just have her iPhone with her. And that's a use case. I know Callie Lewis, your friends of the show, Callie Lewis and John P. from GeekBee, they use Galaxy Notes, not because they're cheaper, not because they don't want to buy a tablet. They have probably 1 million tablets, but they only want to carry one thing with them. They want it to be as big as possible. Yet other people are saying they just want the 4.7 inch because that is a sweet spot. And I know it's really odd to talk about stuff like this when it doesn't exist, when it's not been announced, but I sort of feel like this is the fantasy period. This is like, before the new Godzilla movie comes out, it is everything that we dream it to be, and after we've seen it, it's what the director dreamt it to be. So like right now, I can sort of say what I would like Apple to do because I'm not constrained by what they've actually done.
Understood. And yeah, I'm in the same boat, So this is speculation. This is fan fiction.
Yes. But would you say performance is important to you, but assuming the performance is all equal, and I know you've answered this before, but things change over time. Would you still go big, or would you go for maybe a happy medium?
No, I wouldn't go for kaiju sized. I'd go for performance. I would get performance over size.
Yeah. So all other things being equal, though, the size isn't that important to you?
No, it's not the length of your ship, it's the motion in the ocean.
And that's certainly reasonable. We've seen things like, if, for example, and again, we don't know anything about pixel size, pixel density, stuff like that. Pushing pixels around is expensive. Lighting up bigger panels is expensive. So it's possible that through no fault of its own, like nothing intentional on Apple's part, that a bigger screen would just be a little bit more resource intensive. It could also be like with the iPad Air, has a slightly better screen, has a slightly faster processor. Because it's bigger, they don't have to throttle it down as fast, because processors do not like heat. And putting a processor in a small environment with a massive insulator like a battery means you have to clock that thing down faster. So it's possible the bigger one could be higher performance.
That's exactly right.
See, that again, it gets back to complexity. Like, these are things that geeks like us worry about. I still maintain that an average consumer will go into a store, and all other things being equal, will probably be enticed by the largest thing they see.
I don't know. I mean, people, maybe some, but people are I think, equally driven by their pocketbook and what their expectation of how they're going to use the technology is. People are going to be scared away from a bigger phone because it's more difficult to take around. They might be concerned about breaking the screen more easily because it's bigger, because it's a bigger target. I don't always use a larger pocketbook, so I might want a smaller device. Or how am I supposed to fit that thing in my pants pocket? That's not going to fit in my pants pocket. I wear skinny jeans. That sort of thing. American consumers can be very fickle.
Yeah, and that's the charge, right? That mobile is becoming fashion. That people are making their decisions as part of their overall.
Mobile isn't becoming fashion. Mobile has always been about fashion.
I've seen some of those older phones, Peter.
Well, even those huge white bricks, that was a status symbol.
That's true.
To have one of those, that meant that you were a C-level executive somewhere, and the technology got quickly commoditized and sent out to the masses. But look at what we do to differentiate. White earbuds were for a very long time a status symbol. It meant that you had an iPod. It was a very important thing for some status-conscious people who are interested in such things. And one can argue that kind of understanding of consumer culture is what made Apple buy Beats most recently.
Mm-hmm. Now, Beats are a status symbol.
Beats are at
the World Cup.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how many places I see Beats. And I always want to lecture them about how crappy their headphones are. I own Beats. You can see them in the background over there in the corner. But, whatever.
I have a pair in the corner here, too. I shan't drag them out again. We did get fact-checked by the chat room. Nilesh said the iMac was May 1998 and shipped in August 1998.
All right, so there we go. Yeah, 1998. Thank you very much for checking. I appreciate that.
So he also said there was a rumor going around that only the 5.5-inch iPhone would have, for example, optical image stabilization. It would be the only one with 128 gigabytes. I consider those kind of rumors. I mean, whether they're true or not, it's impossible to tell anything like that at this point. Apple is, for the scale of Apple, they are a remarkably agile company, and there might be technological reasons, physics reasons, economic reasons that is true. But I'm not going to base any. I'm not going to worry about that kind of stuff until I see actual product announcements.
Exactly.
If there is differentiation in the models, if one does have, regardless of the size, optical image stabilization, if it does have 128 gigabytes, I don't know if I need that on a phone. I know Peter has every record ever pressed on his iPod
but
Classic.
Yeah, I do have a big iTunes library. Yep.
So maybe stuff like that will sway some people. Maybe photographers would want OIS. Maybe people like Peter would want 128 gigabytes. So I can absolutely see that being a decision. That to me gets complicated again. It's not that nice iPad Mini, iPad Air decision process.
Yeah, we'll see.
YYZ is saying that 5.5 inches is no longer a car. It's an SUV. Well played indeed.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
Graham Stevens wants to know some of the leaked parts. They have a cutout Apple logo. Is that legit? Is it a payment NFC window? Is it a light? I blame Georgia Dow for this. She has for years been saying that if Apple wants to double iPhone sales, all they need is a glowing Apple logo on a phone.
Remember the glowing apple on the old PowerBooks?
Yes.
Those were the days.
Well, there was a mod for the iPhone that if you were crazy enough, you could modify it to do a glowing Apple logo. I think she tried and wrecked her iPhone. I don't remember that for sure, but
I want a glowing Boston Bruins logo.
no, denied. You have to get the Anaheim might know. What's the San Francisco team? Is it the Sharks? That's where you get.
San Jose Sharks, yeah.
San Jose Sharks. Yeah, I think glowing logos are nice. Like I certainly wouldn't not buy a phone because it has a glowing Apple logo. Are on the Macs. See, this is what is remarkable, Peter. Last year we talked about how everyone thought gold was a bad idea, was dumb, was classless, was ugly, and then as soon as we found out they were rare or people realized that they were different, Apple couldn't keep them in stock. We think real advances are boring, and dumb stuff. I was going to use harsher language, but dumb stuff like gold colors and glowing Apple logos, they sell buttloads of devices.
Yeah, but they also kind of blew it with the iPhone 5C color scheme. That turned out not to be as much of a turn on for people as it was as Apple thought it was. Tim Cook admitted that they got the matrix wrong when they first released the phone, and it wasn't that that iPhone 5 color scheme came as a surprise for Apple. The fact is they just didn't make many 5Ss in gold, at least initially. So for several weeks after the device launched, there was the allure of scarcity, which made people like our own Kevin McCulloch spend absurd amounts of money to get their hands on a gold iPhone.
Yeah, if Apple was really smart, they would put one glowing Apple logo in every box of 10 you buy.
Yeah, there you go. Kind of like the golden ticket in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Or it'd be like those Lego
Charlie
figs where you can't tell which one it is when you buy the bag.
When you buy the bag, exactly.
As for a lot of people talk about NFC, and I know Apple has had NFC in prototypes, and again, Apple prototypes everything. If you can think of anything that is logical and reasonable, Apple has prototyped it. When they say that touchscreen iMacs are not ergonomically friendly, it's because they had somebody using one of those extensively to find out if it was a good idea or not. And when you say like Apple should have NFC, Apple has tested NFC, and for various reasons, they have not decided to go ahead with it in the iPhone. I am a Canadian. I am dripping in NFC. I can go to fast food restaurants. I can go to shopping malls. I can go to grocery stores, and I can go to gas stations and pay for everything by tapping my NFC-enabled credit card. It would certainly make my life easy if an iPhone has an NFC chip, but I think it's really safe to say that Apple has put all the wood in their arrows behind Bluetooth LE at this point.
It certainly seems that way, and NFC seems increasingly unlikely in an Apple product, and there hasn't been an NFC tipping point at this point, at least not in the United States. And it's really interesting how the United States has kind of avoided NFC, where it's something that's been used in the rest of the world pretty ubiquitously, at least in the places where these sort of transactions are common. So why? What's the holdup for NFC in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I remember I picked up some friends at the airport and went to get gas, and I paid for it with NFC, and they're like, "What is that, Canadian magic?"
Right, exactly. I mean, there are registers at my grocery and drug stores that recognize NFC cards, and I've asked the cashier several times who uses these swiping things, and they tell me that nobody uses them. All of us do it the old-fashioned way, by entering our debit PIN number or running it as a credit card transaction and having to actually physically swipe the card. We are cavemen. It
is Canadian tourists who use those things.
Yeah, exactly. That's about it.
So when it comes to, you did an article for us, Peter, on, and I'm switching topics slightly here, but it is NFC and Bluetooth LE related. Continuity is one of the major features in iOS 8 and Yosemite, and that looks like it requires BTLE. So you put together an article, and again, I'll link to it in the show notes. about which Macs have Bluetooth LE enabled, and we keep getting tweets about it, we keep getting emails, we keep getting comments about it. People with older Macs are really afraid that continuity won't work for them, or the Yosemite won't work for them because they don't have Bluetooth LE. Whether they have to start looking for dongles, whether dongles will work. I know it's too early to tell, but I think there is a lesson here. I think Apple was really smart that at the presentation they never mentioned Bluetooth LE. Bluetooth LE was at the developer sessions after. But also this stuff wasn't NDA'd, so it rapidly spread, the Bluetooth LE thing. But I think it did create some sort of stress in the Mac marketplace.
Yeah, it certainly does, because the cutoff for Bluetooth LE is fairly recent. Bluetooth 4.0 only started appearing in Macs, I think, in 2011. If I remember what I wrote correctly. Good grief, my short-term memory is bad. I'm sorry. It is something that many people who are using Macs that are continuing to work well are concerned about. And the questions come up whether or not you're going to be able to add a Bluetooth 4.0 dongle to your Mac and expect it to work. Well, past Bluetooth dongles have worked, so I don't see why that should be any different this time around, but we can't know that for sure. And the other thing to bear in mind is that iOS 8 and OS 10 Yosemite are still projects in flux. Mm-hmm. Apple hasn't given any definitive word on what works with what or what will work with what when the hammer finally drops and we get final releases for both these things. So let's just take a wait-and-see approach before we freak out too much about whether or not our Macs can do this stuff. And, the bottom line is you always have to be considering what your upgrade cycle is going to be whenever you make a purchase, because if it's technology that you depend on and you need the latest features for everything, you're going to have to invest in new hardware to keep up with it over time.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of good points in there. Well, first of all, I mean, just one of the most panicked responses, you can still run Yosemite even in a world where your computer was so old it didn't run Bluetooth. You could still run, as long as your machine is supported, you can run Yosemite. You might not get all the features of it the same way older iOS devices don't get the features of new iOS versions, but if you're eligible, you'll be able to run Yosemite.
For sure, absolutely. And Yosemite's basic system requirements aren't that different from Mavericks as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and what Peter said is unflux, but also Bluetooth LE is such an enabling technology. LE means low energy, and there are so many things that Apple could do. AirDrop on iOS and now on OS 10 is because of Bluetooth LE. A lot of these features exist. I mean, you could probably do them with older Bluetooth, but they would be incredibly expensive in terms of power. Power is all about low energy. It's all about race to sleep. It's all about putting the stuff together. And unfortunately, Bluetooth LE is one of those inflection points. It's like LTE. It's a technology that lets us do more things. So it sucks if you, and I have computers that are before Bluetooth LE, and they will probably need a dongle or won't work with continuity. But going forward, I'm glad Apple, as is typical, is that they are quick to adopt new technologies when and where it makes sense.
That's right.
We're going to take another short break, and we're going to thank another of our terrific sponsors, and that is Igloo. Igloo is bringing task management to the intranet. Not the internet, but the intranet. Some of you might be familiar with other products. I mean, Microsoft makes SharePoint. There's a bunch of them on there. But this is one that you are actually going to like. So think about tasks that you do that aren't part of a specific project. Updating graphics in a presentation, requesting text changes in a Word document, delegating to-dos after a meeting. If you work at a company, if you have a day-to-day job, these are things that are very typical, and Igloo makes it really easy by keeping these kinds of tasks directly with your content. You don't need a project and a specific task list. You can use, you don't need a project and a specific task list, but you can use those to content tasks, inform your team if documents need edits, if it's ready to go to a client. They're particularly great for recurring meetings. Like if you view everything talked about in last week's meeting, it's easy to see what was completed and what wasn't. It is accountability. It is the kind of thing that Apple does with people directly responsible for things. That's how you get, good work done. And when you're the one assigned tasks, whether it's up on a project list, on content, on a personal task, they all show up in one view. It's the easiest way to manage your day-to-day work. Your tasks are free for all. Tasks are free for all Igloo customers. It's coming this summer as part of Igloo's latest update. That's called Unicorn. Peter, I don't know if you have been cursed with using other intranet or task management systems in other lives.
I have indeed in the past.
I don't know if your experience matched mine, but they basically reduced me to a crying ball of angry putty on the ground.
There are a few things that actually can bring me to my knees faster than that.
I was actually a SharePoint administrator at one point. I wanted to end myself.
I can understand why. It feels like you were in corporate hell.
Yeah, it is. To quote John Gruber, it is one of the apps that is pre-installed and undeletable on your corporate hell machine. But Igloo stops all that. Igloo is really nice. Igloo is built by people who care about user experience, the kind of people who buy Apple products, the kind of people who want, frankly, watch shows like the iMore show. I want to thank them for sponsoring us. All you have to do is go to igloosoftware.com/iMore. You can find out everything you need to know about Igloo, everything about their latest update, Unicorn, and it lets them know you come from us. It's a great way to support this show. I want to thank you for supporting them because they are supporting us. igloosoftware.com/iMore.
Thanks, Igloo.
All right, Peter. So,
before we get off onto our next tangent, Rene, the Mac Mini and MacBook Air were both updated with Bluetooth 4.0 support in their 2011 refreshes. The MacBook Pro and iMac added it a year later in 2012. All MacBook Pros with Retina displays obviously have Bluetooth 4.0. The Mac Pro languished without Bluetooth 4.0 until the new Mac Pro came out. The circular turbine Mac Pro came out in December of 2013.
I have my Cheese Waiter Nehalem Mac Pro right there.
I stroke it from time to time to let it know that it's still a very beloved piece of machinery and that I depend on it every day.
Yeah, no, good to know. And again, I'll link to the complete list in the show notes. So, Peter, you had a bit of a week. I mean, your advice to everyone was not to install Yosemite on your production device, but to put it on a disk.
Yeah.
What did you do?
This is one of those do as I say, not as I do sort of thing. So here's the story, Rene. You and I were sharing a hotel room in San Francisco at WWDC, and we had an intimate moment. Oh, no, wait a minute. That's something else. Never mind. And I decided in the heat of the moment that I really needed to get Yosemite on there, and I really didn't think it through very well. So I just put it on my live production system, and I knew better. I knew that it was a big mistake. That's why I keep backup systems, and I'm glad that I have them. What I found, though, is that downgrading from Yosemite back to Mavericks is not very easy. Apple does not make it very easy for you to downgrade your operating system. In the same, not necessarily as stringently as it is on iOS, but it's still kind of a PITA, if you know what I mean.
A pain in the apps.
That's a pain in the apps is a good way to put it. So the bottom line is you can do it, and the most effective way to do it is by doing internet recovery rather than just the system recovery that you normally do with a Mac that's having big problems. So ordinarily, if you've got a Mac that's been built since Lion, you can just hold down the Command R key when you start up your Mac, and it will enter the recovery system. And the recovery system will let you reformat your drive. It will let you install a fresh copy of the operating system. Well, in some cases, people who have upgraded to Yosemite can use recovery system to downgrade to Mavericks. It will pop up an option there to install a new operating system, and if you click on it, it will install Mavericks. But mine wasn't set up like that, and I don't know if it's because I already had the second beta installed or what, but the bottom line is it wanted to install 10.10 over again, and what's worse, it would always freeze up on authentication, so I was having some serious difficulties. The way around this is to do internet recovery, so Command Option R, when you first start up the Mac, forces the Mac to go out to the internet and try to download both the recovery partition and the core operating system for your Mac over the internet, connecting to Apple's Mac App Store server, downloading that whole process, and getting that ball rolling. It takes longer because instead of just Command R and blam, you're running off of a recovery partition. This is actually downloading all that over the internet. So you get the spinning globe thing that you see when you're trying to boot from a network server, and a progress bar that shows you how many minutes it's going to take for that to load, an estimation. Then it downloads the operating system software itself, installs it, and you've got a Mac running Mavericks again. At that point, you can restore any missing files that you've got from a backup. If you don't have a backup, you're an idiot.
Yeah, and you've got a wonderful guide on how to keep your Mac backed up both locally on the internet and with recovery systems, everything from Time Machine to Backplay sort of things.
The interesting thing, Rene, is that it's given me a great opportunity to sort of reassess how I'm using my Mac. And what I'm finding is that I actually don't need to keep files on there that I thought I had to keep before. Like my entire music collection. I was telling you before the show started that for right now, I'm keeping the bulk of my massive kaiju-sized music collection off of my Mac, and I'm just keeping it in the cloud because I'm an iTunes Match subscriber, so I can keep that stuff in the cloud and not worry about it and sync it to whatever machine I want to as I want to use it.
Yeah, no, I think that's spectacular. I think a large part of the future is going to be cloud-based. Like, I personally don't like the idea of the total thin client universe the way Scott McNealy or Larry Page, Larry Ellison, or even Google. Yeah, talk about it, because I do think that there's still a place for native. I do like the hybrid approach where the things most critical and important to me are local, and the things that can be, it's sort of the nearline strategy where they're not online but they're not offline. They're available to me within a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going to ask you something else. Oh, we had a question. The Samsung Watch, this is from Anthony Hall. The Samsung Watch, Google Watch, is pretty ugly. Do you think with Angela Ahrendts on board at Apple, the iWatch will be more of a functional fashion accessory?
It'll be very interesting to me to see whether Johnny Ive, and Angela Ahrendts collaborate on something fashionable for Apple. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Angela Ahrendts moved over to Apple fairly recently, and Apple, the iWatch project's been underway for a few years now. I mean, the iPhone was 2 years before we heard anything about it. The iPad was longer because it predated the iPhone project. Whatever the iWatch is, they've been working on that, for a while now, and it's probably, I think, too late in the process for her to have tremendous impact. Like, there are, I'm sure, I have no idea. I can't say I'm sure of anything. I don't know what that structure is. Johnny Ive runs design at Apple. Angela Ahrendts runs online and retail stores at Apple. And I don't know what the decision matrix is there, but I think it's very early on. I think she'll absolutely have an influence on Apple long term, but I don't know about the first iWatch.
I don't know about the first iWatch, but I wouldn't be surprised if she, is able to exercise some influence in how the iWatch is marketed.
Absolutely, and I love the fact that Apple has more diversity in their executive makeup, because she can walk in there. And Apple, to be clear, they've had women involved in the company for a long time, but she is the first senior vice president who's a woman at Apple, and that will just lead to better products for everybody for so many reasons.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Steve Winslow wants to know, will an iPhone 6 Verizon version work on AT&T? That is the kind of question that you can answer technically and you can answer politically. I mean, technically, they have had SIM cards in every LTE iPhone. Politically, carriers can block their competition, and might be in their best interests, not our best interest, but their best interests to block them. So we'll only know once somebody gets a Verizon iPhone and sticks an AT&T SIM in it.
Today, and we can talk about the way that it works today. If you have a Verizon phone that has been paid for and is unlocked, so if you have had Verizon unlock your phone, you can pop a SIM out and you can do business with AT&T or Sprint or T-Mobile. If you pick up a SIM from them and put it in the phone, and the phone will work. If I recall right, because the iPhone 5S is universal. Isn't that right?
I think when you first buy it, though, it only works international. And I could be wrong about this because I'm not an American and I haven't paid that close attention. It would work with but I know for sure it works with international SIMs.
Right. So, but that presumes that the phone is unlocked. If it's locked, then that's a whole different issue. And this is why I buy my phones unlocked, because I don't want them encumbered with any issues. The problem is if you try to bring another phone from AT&T, let's say, to Verizon, that's a no-go, because Verizon only wants to deal with phones that are locked on its network.
Yeah, so I believe the Verizon...
I've never heard of anybody bringing their phone to Verizon and Verizon making it work.
No, it would. Yeah, they're goofy for a number of reasons. I believe the SIM slot is unlocked on the Verizon phone, but if anyone in the chat room knows for sure, or someone listening to the show knows for sure, please email us, let us know, and we'll follow up on that. All right, so Peter, there's a couple apps I wanted to talk to you about because I'm getting increasingly confused about apps. In the last couple of weeks, we've had either introduced or gone wide things like Facebook Slingshot and things like Yo. And I don't understand these apps. So the first one, Slingshot, is by Facebook, ginormous company. If you were to slingshot me, I could not look at what you sent me until I send you a slingshot back. And then you could not look at that, my understanding is, until you slingshot me back. It's like having a conversation where you can't hear the other person speak before you have to record your dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, the idea here is that everybody's a creator, nobody's a spectator, right? Okay, great. Yeah, that seems really contrived to me. I don't like it.
It seems like a way of forcing engagement, but in a way that's not beneficial to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of these bizarre moves from Facebook. You know, they did Facebook Home, they did Chat Heads, they did the Facebook Poke app as a weekend project. They've done Facebook Paper. And I just don't know the strategy. I use Facebook. It's not my favorite service. I've changed. Maybe I'll do an article on this. I'll mention a little bit here. I've changed the way I use social networks considerably over the last few months. Twitter I mainly use to keep in contact with industry people, for people that I either work with or work in the same industry as me. I have LinkedIn for just any kind of business connection. I keep Facebook for people that I know in the real world, that I've met or that I'm friends with. I don't just have tons of people on Facebook. So it's a very small world for me. And Facebook has been separating all their mobile apps. So, for example, now to use Messages, it keeps wanting me to have the Messages app. And then there's the Camera app. And there's all these things. And it just seems very fragmented to me. And I don't know what the strategy is. But as a user, I feel increasingly off-put.
Yes, I can understand why, and I appreciate that.
Now, what I don't do is I don't cross-post my Twitter stuff to Facebook. I'm not sure if you do.
It really depends. In some cases, I'll make that exception, but I kind of follow the same guideline that you do. Facebook for me is there are a few select people who I will Facebook. I have Facebook friended who I know professionally, but for the most part, I limit it to family and friends. You know, people I know in the real world.
The chat room is saying it's probably better if I don't see your slingshots, Peter. That's kind of mean, though.
That is kind of mean and uncalled for, and I frankly am hurt.
The other app is Yo. So the idea behind Yo, and again, this was a project.
This is the stupidest app I've ever heard of. Let me just say that up front.
Yeah, and Derek Kessler had a great headline on this. It's an app that does sweet F all. But the idea was that you could just send the message Yo back and forth between people who were your contacts, and it based your contacts off your telephone number. And it was made very quickly. It got $1 million in funding. This is money that could have gone to feed people. And it turns out that it didn't even keep those telephone numbers secure.
Yeah, and they're all happy about it, that they got breached this early in their use. Well, great. I'm glad that you guys are happy. I don't think any of your users were.
But this, again, is like I have this theory, I talked about it last week with David Barnard on the show, is that it gets rage of mouth marketing. And I don't know why we're so quick to adopt these things when the repercussions could be as dire as your contacts getting breached.
Well, Paul Kafasis from Rogue Amoeba, I think, had the bon mot about Yo. He said that what we really need is a social network tool like Yo that just sends the new middle finger emoji instead.
Oh, he's got away with emoji.
Yes, he does. Either that or the poop emoji. The poop emoji would be fine, too.
So I'm wondering if this is just part of the turbulence that is social. Like, social still hasn't settled down, even though it's been years since Friendster and MySpace ruled the social waves, and Facebook is now given way to messaging services. Or it just, I don't know what it says about us as app consumers, if anything.
I don't think it says anything good about us as app consumers. I think that app developers are always looking for an angle to exploit, and if they can come up with a trendy way for people to connect, then there it is. But Yo, I mean, as contrived as Facebook's Snapchat thing is, Yo is even more contrived. I mean, yeah, some people do say Yo to each other, but you can't build any kind of meaningful social structure out of Yo. It's just ridiculous.
All right, so in slightly better news, Microsoft has greatly upped the amount of storage that you get. Pricing in general, the value in general for OneDrive. Now, I just keep collecting OneDrive space, and I've used it sometimes as a redundant backup to Dropbox, but it's getting ridiculously cheap. We don't have the final word on Apple's pricing for iCloud Drive, for the new iCloud storage. But it does seem like this market is getting increasingly competitive. But it's another thing that's getting increasingly confusing to me. I see tweets recently about how people's Dropbox space is disappearing because they got it as part of a deal when they bought certain Android devices, and now it's going away. And that to me is still overly complicated. Even Apple's new schemes are still overly complicated because I can store all my photos, but I still only have 5 gigs. I like the Backblaze model where it's $5 per computer, unlimited. I don't know if that could transfer over to services like Dropbox or like iCloud or like Google Drive, but I think we need some sort of sanity in this market.
I think that that would make a lot of sense. We definitely need more sanity in this market. No question.
Do you have any early feelings for the iCloud pricing? I know Apple said it's something like 99 cents for an additional 20 gigabytes, and it's $9, I think, for.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that Apple has up until now offered a yearly model, a yearly subscription model for iCloud, and it seemed like if we infer anything from the news that we got at WWDC, that Apple is offering monthly plans as well. It'll be interesting to see how aligned it is compared to what it is now and what else is out there. But I think that Apple believes that it can charge a premium for iCloud because of all the added utility that you get with it if you're already plugged into the iOS and OS X ecosystem.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Part of me, wants to pay a good price for a good service. If Apple can actually deliver, and Apple has struggled with iCloud over the years. It's not like Apple is the industry leader when it comes to cloud storage. But I have no qualms against paying premium. But part of me also thinks that services are increasingly becoming table stakes in the device, and you have to provide a base level and maybe more than a base level for free. Like we talked about previously, if you buy a 64 gigabyte or 128 gigabyte device, you should get enough storage to back up that device, to back up your photos, to do that kind of stuff. It feels to me like that is the simpler customer prospect.
One would assume. Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that.
All right, Peter, so last question for you. Playing any good games lately? Anything you'd recommend?
Not a damn thing. I haven't had any time, man. I seriously haven't. I haven't even played the stuff that I usually just keep on in the background to occupy myself when I'm, waiting 5 minutes for something. I haven't had any time for gaming at all. How about you, Rene? What have you found?
I've downloaded Lego Marvel because I'm a sucker for Lego and for Marvel. It's not as good as the consoles because I like playing with my godkids. That's the funnest thing to me, and you can't really do that on an iPad. But I do like the idea that it is mobile. I think it's still a challenge, the control schemes and things like that. And I'm interested to see what might happen next spring with an Apple TV and things like Metal and things like the Made for iPhone controller program and the stuff you've been writing about. But for now, I think we're still kind of stuck with the casual games.
Well, There's some really cool stuff out there. I haven't played any games, but I have been writing about them. And in fact, I just did a roundup of new and updated apps that were all games today, Thursday, on iMore. So head on over to iMore and check that out. There's some really cool stuff in there. There's a really cool-looking sort of abstracted racer called Hex Sweep that looks really neat. I did download World of Tanks Blitz, and gave it a try and was pretty impressed with it. It's a really neat MMO that puts you in 7-by-7-man teams online as you pilot a tank over terrain and around buildings and so on, and try to capture the flag and do other stuff against other teams. It's a lot of fun. It's free to play. That might be worth checking out too. I tried it for about 2 seconds on my iPad third generation, so I haven't played it long enough to actually have a verdict on it yet, but when I played through the tutorial, it was pretty nifty.
And Peter and I and the rest of us at iMore have also been trying out Slack recently as sort of a campfire replacement, and I like it. It's got a lot of great functionality in it. I would recommend anyone interested in that kind of stuff to give it a look. Like if you're thinking of HipChat, if you're thinking of any of that kind of virtual office software, I think Slack is interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. Slack is an experiment for us, but so far seems to be working out pretty well for what we need it for.
We're learning.
We are.
All right, Peter, thank you so much. A quick programming note, we are going to be moving the time of the iMore show. We're going to move it from 4 p.m. to 2 p.m. because that'll let us get the show up earlier in the day. Some people have said that it's getting up too late Thursday night and they don't see it and then they get it Friday morning or whatever. So we are here to make you happy. We're going to move it to 2 p.m. It's the same time as Mac Break Weekly, so you only have to remember one. If you want to watch both, you only have to remember one time. So it'll be 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to start that next week. Of course, watching live is the best way to enjoy the show. You get to interact with Peter and I and our guests in real time, the way that our wonderful chat room has been interacting with us all this during this show. If you can't watch us live, the show, of course, is available on YouTube. It's available on iTunes. It's available via RSS, both the video and the audio. In the video, you can actually see Peter and I while we're talking. On the audio, though, you can just listen to us. So whatever your choice is, we are there for you. Peter, if people are interested in your writing, if they want to see more of your notoriously famous Twitter stream, where can they go?
They can see me on Twitter at Flarg, Flargh, and on iMore.com.
And you can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find me also on iMore.com. You can find all of our shows. We are continuing the Nitin Ganatra trilogy on Debug right now. If you go to iMore.com/debug. Nitin retired as director of iOS apps from Apple. He was one of the people on the original iPhone team. Last week he told us all about the early days of the Mac. This week he's been telling us about the Purple project and about making the first iPhone. If you are at all interested in the history of the iPhone, which I personally think is one of the most culturally important technology products, if not products in general, of the last decade, do yourself a favor, listen to that show. I think he was tremendously generous in sharing all that his story with us. Otherwise, I want to thank Igloo Software once again for sponsoring the show. If you want to find out all about their new Unicorn update, including their task management system, just go to igloosoftware.com/iMore. And Peter, thank you once again for co-hosting with me.
Thank you very much for having me, Rene, and we'll see you all next week.
Yeah. Thank you, chat room. Have a good week, guys.